This happened about 5 years ago. My grandma was getting old, late 80s/early 90s. She had one wish, to not pass in a senior home. Easily done, as my grandpa sold some assets way back when, then invested the money and let it ride for 30+ years. He never touched it and collected a pension. Way back when my grandpa passed, about 10 years before this, my grandma appointed my dad, this awful aunt, and my uncle as the trustees of the trust, basically the trusted advisors for her and her care for the foreseeable future. All was well in the beginning. Then my dad, Willie, moved further away and couldn't take care of the day-to-day upkeep as the trustee and to see that my grandma was okay. My aunt, Rebecca, told her that she and my uncle, Fred, who lived in Arizona, could take over and all would be fine. It was fine for a while. A few times my dad went back to visit and noticed my grandma didn't always have overnight care, or that her mail wasn't picked up and the driveway wasn't plowed. She also lost her cable TV and newspaper subscription. My dad figured it just lapsed, so he had the services put back on. My dad also noticed my grandma was eating moldy food at times because her truck was sold and she had no transportation. She basically just chilled at the house alone and did crossword puzzles. The craziest part of this is that my aunt only lived 2 miles from my grandma, but my grandma told my dad she saw Aunt Rebecca once a week on Saturday for about 1 hour. As with the elderly and age, my grandma eventually passed. She did get her wish and was able to go in her own home. Upon her passing, things started to get real interesting. Once the probate lawyer got her children, my dad, aunt, uncle and another estranged aunt, Becky, around the table, some shady business started to come out. My aunt Rebecca asked that everyone just forego any audit or paperwork and they just sell the house, for around $400,000, and divide up the remaining account balance of roughly $400,000. So just signing on the line, each sibling was to get a check for $200,000, not too bad of an inheritance. My dad, however, thought that was somewhat a little rushed. He said at the time that he wanted to wait because my grandma's house was easily in the $600,000 range based on size and location. My aunt exploded in his face, cursing at him and calling him all kinds of names because he was unwilling to sign the assets then and there. She basically wanted a quick close while everyone looked the other way. My dad ended up leaving the room after the screaming and the deal wasn't signed that day. It took nearly 6 months before another appointment and they were all back at the table. The thing is though, when you are a trustee and the person passes, the funds and access to financial accounts are all under heavy scrutiny until all beneficiaries are made aware and sign the final papers. At the next meeting, my dad went in there with no intention to sign the deal. He got his brother, my uncle Fred, to agree that they audit the entire accounts going back 5 years. When they demanded this again at the meeting with the lawyer, my aunt ended up arguing that a forensic audit would cost $5,000 and it's a waste. Like, what difference does it make? 2 beneficiaries requested it, though, so it was what was going to happen. The audit report showed up about 3 months later. Here is where it gets really good. My dad began looking over the audit report and saw it was full of holes, like excessive monthly food costs for a 90-year-old lady, payments made for car services for a car my grandma no longer had, many different things in there that just didn't add up. My dad asked me to give the audit a second look, so I spent a Saturday night going over it, and here is some crazy stuff I found, and alerted my dad about. Costco monthly food costs of $1,100 to $2,000 for the last 4 years. Telephone bills for 6 cell phones. Grandma had a home phone only. Gasoline for a truck my grandma didn't have for like 4 years, and easily $400 per month. House repairs paid to my aunt's husband who owned a construction business. Some of the house repairs were like $16,000 for a new roof, new garage doors, home security system which she didn't have, etc., and all at inflated prices. Grandma paid for my aunt to go to Europe twice on vacation. My grandma was paying my estranged Aunt Becky a stipend of $2,000 a month for the last 5 years, as well as her deadbeat son for $2,500. Every month they were paid. All grandkids were to be paid a lump sum of $10,000 upon their 30th birthday, as that is when the $50 check from grandma stopped for all grandkids. Yes, who was paid out? Rebecca's kids and my estranged aunt's kids, but not me or my siblings. My grandma gave loans to my Aunt Rebecca for her husband's construction business in return for equity in the company, which amounted to nothing. These loans totaled about $200,000 over 3 years, right around when the housing bust happened. They also sold her assets like jewelry and whatnot for cash, because some big-ticket items simply vanished from her house. Armed with all this, the next probate meeting was interesting. In the time between my grandma's passing and the third probate meeting, my aunt's construction business filed for bankruptcy, so that $200,000 in equity grandma had simply vanished. The probate lawyer was also somewhat concerned and makes it obvious that this was a breach of fiduciary duty, where my aunt could actually get real prison time. After this, the negotiations were much more favorable. My aunt got nothing, literally zero. My other aunt only received $25,000 after all the stipend payments. My father and uncle shared the rest after all grandkids received the $10,000 payout. The house sold to the first offer for $520,000. That was the regular revenge for the treacherous witch who ripped off grandma and had her eating moldy food. Here is the professional revenge. My aunt probably felt pretty bad that she couldn't supplement her lifestyle with grandma's money anymore, but that was the least of her worries. Since she tried to rip me off for $10,000, I took it personally. I don't care how tough you are, the IRS is the scariest thing that can happen to a person. Nobody wants to have their money forcibly removed. I did a little research, photocopied my documents, had them notarized and sent off the info to the IRS. I felt like it went nowhere. Then maybe 18 months later I was notified and asked to come to the IRS building for an appointment in my city. The agent went over all the details, basically, what they found in their research, and then they asked for a sworn statement. It turns out my aunt didn't declare something like $1.2 million in additional income over 5 years, and as such she owed the IRS around $420,000 plus penalties. There was no way she was going to pay that on a teacher's pension, and after her husband bankrupted his business, her house was sold, her vehicle sold, and they left the state. Now my aunt and uncle live in a depressing desert. The IRS then paid me around $60,000 about 3 months after the appointment. She should have paid that $10,000.